And welcome to our weekly LinkedIn Live leadership series, Voices of Leadership. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kathy Eastwood, your host and founder and CEO of Equals Y. Each week, we explore the fascinating world of leadership, featuring voices from various generations, industries, and backgrounds. It's really the team's job to deliver business results. It's the job of the leader to empower, inspire, and enable the team and the individuals to deliver those results. And there's a repeatable formula for this. Express plus engage plus execute, powered by emotions. And that's the E3 leadership code. However, each leader's approach to applying that code is different. And it's not about fitting a mold. There's no one way to lead. And that's why we have these sessions. We love to hear from different leaders and understand their approach and how they look at things. So today, please take the moment to introduce yourself. Let us know where you're calling in from, and feel free to ask questions. Val and I are ready to answer all of your questions. And with that, let's get started because I want to introduce our guest today. And Val is someone who really helps make me think differently about innovation every time we talk. So I'm very excited to welcome Vele Galovski, and I was practicing your name earlier. He's the
Good.
Chief Innovation Engineer and founder of Perpetual Innovation Machine. Val embraces this quote by Robert M. Gates, a passion for leadership and I love this. Only the people who work for you can bring about the transformational changes you seek. What stands out about Val is how he blends big vision with grounded leadership. He knows innovation isn't about a whiteboard full of ideas. It's about building the trust, simplicity, and really empowering leaders at every level to actually make things happen. And he's got the proof to back it up. And what you're here today aligns with the E3 leadership code, a rhythm that helps the 8% succeed. So Val, let's kick it off. I just did a very quick intro, but why don't you tell our audience a bit about your journey and what really has shaped your belief that execution, not just ideas, is the true engine of innovation?
All right, great. Thanks, Kathy, and hello to everybody. Yeah, this is always a very passionate topic for me, and really, it started right out of college. To be fair, right? My first job out of college was as a frontline supervisor on the third shift in a union factory. And it taught me a really important lifelong lesson that really I'll never forget is that ideas are cheap and execution is priceless because, at the ripe age of 23, I had my MBA and I thought I could be the superintendent. I thought I could run the whole show. And what I learned was the MBA gave me insights on what to do, right? But the real test was inspiring people to actually do it. And, in many ways, that's the origin story for the Perpetual Innovation Machine. It's not a lightning bolt moment that everybody wants to kind of talk about this idea like, hey, I'm going to wait for this and I'm going to get this idea while I'm walking or in the shower or things like that. But it has to be tied to an outcome that you engineer and you use discipline, data driven processes and continuous improvement, because at the end of the day the only thing that matters is did you deliver. I had all these great ideas, but did you deliver? That's what always comes out at the end.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier in the intro, right? Only 8% traditionally have succeeded in delivering their results,
Right.
right? So it's really about you have to do something different. And great leadership isn't about having just these ideas, right? Otherwise, they're going to sit. I call it, what do we call it? Shelfware, right? These ideas sitting on the shelf.
Right. I used to say it was a three-ring binder sitting on the shelf collecting dust, but now it's just lost. It's just lost in your desktop or in your file somewhere.
And what do you think, when you think of the leadership journey and what you've gone through, right? So you've experienced a lot through your career, as you've come in. What do you think the role is of hardship and resilience plays into that journey for you?
Yeah, I've written about it and talked about it to a lot of friends, right? Anybody that'll listen. So thanks for listening. But a quote that was attributed to Sophocles comes to mind, and that was, "There's no success without hardship." And I remember going back earlier in my career, I had a great mentor, and I was really overwhelmed, with fear, anxiety. I got this big new job, and I went to him and I said, "Man, this is, I don't know, I'm a little nervous about going into this role." And he just smiled and he said to me, "Good, I know now that we picked the right assignment for you." And the lesson that I took from that session with my mentor and the job that I took was that I had to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because the idea of resilience, it's not given to you from easy path. It's fair weather captains are never really going to make it to the end, right? It's formed by when projects fail, teams stumble. You have to overcome something, and then this is the place where leaders learn to adapt, find the right solutions, and then ultimately have the confidence to achieve great things, because great things don't come just like that, right? I mean, you're going to hit some points along the way that are a little bumpy. And if you're accustomed to that and you're comfortable being uncomfortable and know that that's a minor setback, you can achieve great things. And so I love that quote. But I always like to say, with all due respect to Sophocles, right, the one of the greatest thinkers of all time, he got it nearly right, because it's true that there is no success without hardship, but he forgot to add "or support." And I think this is an important leadership lesson as well, because everybody likes to recall all the great challenges. Man, wow, look at the hills I climbed, the gale force winds, 4 feet of snow to and from work, and on and on and on. But you never ever succeed without help along the way. You got friends, family, coworkers, and sometimes even strangers that have helped you and supported you along the way. And so, yeah, if you want to be resilient, it does take some hardship. It does take a little bit of stretch, being uncomfortable, and don't forget, the people that helped you get there.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, how much do you think it is going and being willing to ask for that help and, being able to delegate to others and to bring them into the work that you're doing?
Incredibly important, right? I know that there's a lot of times people ask me, questions about, how do you go about, making this work? How do you become adaptable, and avoid any of this rigidity? Like, how do you make all these things work? And something that's really important is you have to kind of establish a culture where dissent is not only, welcomed, but it's seen as being really important, because it's tough to ask for help if you've never set the environment where people feel free to give you advice. um if you're constantly being told in a meeting, stick a pin in it, or that's not helpful, or let's keep things moving. I mean, it's really hard to find out what the real issue is and what you need to do and how to go about it.
Yeah, I agree. And, I just, and this is why when we first talked, and you're very strong on bringing that strategy to execution. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the E3 leadership code, right? Express the envision. Where
Yeah.
are we going? And engaging people around you. You can't do it alone. And when you know who's around you, you can bring in their ideas. It just helps inspire the people that are working with you, right? But then also helping drive things forward, which really then kind of, when you think about it, right? Because you're talking about execution.
Mhm.
And sometimes when people think about execution, they can think, oh, it's just operational, it's very road. It's how do you balance innovation in with execution? And how do you look at the two of those together?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
I
it's
think
kind
it's
of like
kind of
a
like a
false choice in a way, right? I think, you don't have to choose one over the other, right? I think you can pursue both, but in order to make both work, you have to make innovation a standard operating procedure, and you have to incorporate that into your operational cadence and workflow and everything. And so I'll give you a quick example about how this works, right? So I have a U.S. business process patent with my team from Bank of America back in the day, and it's around how do you achieve breakthrough performance? How do you manage achieving an objective? So at the bank, let's go through the example. We wanted to become the provider of choice in the marketplace, and a good measure of that, right? Take that breakthrough idea, tie it to a measure. The measure was overall satisfaction with the bank. Considering all the business you do, how do you feel? So once you do that, then you got to start thinking, well, you know, how are we doing as an entity on that measure? Well, we were lower than the Internal Revenue Service, which at the time is not a good thing to be, right? Or ever. And then we also needed to know who was the best out there, who at the time was the Ritz-Carlton. So now you got this huge, huge gap between where you are and where you want to be. And instead of getting depressed about it, you got to engineer a way to get there. Do the hard work, find what's causing the gap, tie solutions tie the solutions to that gap, and then you just start chipping away at it. And when we engineered that solution, we went from worst to first in the industry in 3 years. And so the objective of creating a perpetual innovation machine is to get tools and to establish that operational cadence that turns innovation execution into a standard operating procedure. And so like we've created things like 3-page strategic plan, using management by fact to close those gaps, and really to start to deploy it. And so that's I think that's the way you can achieve both. And I've done it with my teams in the past. We've made that work.
Yeah, and I love the word balance, right? Because it's not a choice of either or. I think the best leaders really do have that balance between strategic and tactical, right? Innovation and execution, and doing and feeling, right? Like all of these, I think leadership is about bringing everyone into the table.
Right,
How do
right.
you, you talk about having the process for innovation. How do you help the CEO, who really is the ideas person, right, understand why it really does pay to have this operational excellence for seeing that idea come to fruition?
Well, I think they, just like we talked before, you can have great ideas, but if you don't deliver, you're not going to be there very long, right? And the funny thing about like your question is that a lot of times people will be like, hey, this is my idea, and we're going to deploy this idea, this one measurement throughout the entire organization. Well, there's an idea that I like to call the time span of control, because the CEO, their time span is to deliver the good year, right? They have to deliver the full year. Their C-suite has to deliver 4 good quarters. The people that report into the C-suite have to deliver 3 good months every quarter. They have teams that have to give 4 good weeks, and then every individual contributor has to give you 5 good days, right? So when you look at this, is there a metric in the world that is the same from the CEO to 5 good days? Maybe, but you got to deploy that execution. You got to have everybody kind of aligned all the way through, to say, hey, this is what I'm doing today to contribute to the success of the company, and this is how I'm aligned. And then guess what? The execution starts to happen.
So I want to, this time span of control that you mentioned. I mean, this is brilliant. And I want to make sure that we're just breaking this down for leaders, right? Because this is how you foster leadership at every level, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And how did you come up with this time span of control? Because I mean, I thought I've heard a lot of different sayings and nuggets, and this is one that's definitely new. I get the concept, but it's not talked about a lot.
Well, you know, it was interesting because I had a boss once who used to say if I had enough arms and legs I'd do everything, and the follow on was, John, you don't have enough arms and legs, right? You can't be everywhere all at the same time. And you can't, in today's world, really, any time, you can't ever afford to have employees that are sitting back waiting to be told what to do. And so, this idea of, time span of control and creating leadership at every level, is really the job that we have as leaders is to teach others to be leaders, not followers, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you want to do is you want to make everybody a owner of their time span of control. I don't want you to wait. I want you to, hey, guess what? My staff, back in the day, you always have my number. You can call me at any time, but in 1 week, that's your time span of control. In 1 week, we'll come up for air and see how you did. That's a small thing, right? But guess what? It encourages everybody to kind of have that freedom within that time span, within that 1 week, to define and shape their job, and then to make key decisions if things don't go quite right, and so a lot of times that time span is really tied to their experience, their level in the organization, everything. When people start taking that ownership at all these different time spans throughout the company, and you take the time to orchestrate it the right way, you've got a winning combination, because people, want to come in and want to do a good job every day, and our job is to, help them become those leaders, to keep them engaged, to equip them with the right tools, and to tell them I trust you, and that's a big thing.
And that's really like when you talk to a lot of employees and they're frustrated with leadership, one of the things you'll hear is, I'm being micromanaged.
Yeah.
Right. And when I look and think about how you're positioning this, and I think this is exactly how you ensure that you're not micromanaging, right?
Right,
When you
right,
can explain it with that time span of control of, hey, we need to deliver things, right? And my job is to come in and make sure that what are we doing, what you need to do, and then checking to make sure we have to trust but verify, right? To
right.
make sure that you're delivering on what we need.
Well, let's face it, I mean, nobody can escape being measured, and micromanaged to some extent. I mean, you're right. Within that time span, you have that freedom, but it always does come down to, you still have to deliver. I always laugh. The people who complain about that, a lot of times I'll say, who's your favorite baseball team, or what's going on? Man, they'll be able to tell me the statistics, to the thousandth decimal point on the batting average. They'll be able to tell me who's doing what, where, what their ERA is, blah 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 blah. Yeah, see, I mean, we all measure, we all get measured, we all are accountable, and just making that alignment is something that's really important.
I agree. And that's why we start off with the job of a team is to deliver results, right? At
Yeah.
the end of the
Yep.
day. And then we as leaders are, how do we facilitate and inspire and empower and enable people to do it? So just as you said, right, really creating a team and leadership at every
Yep.
level. So I love what
Yep.
you have to share there. So we were talking about the team here, right? And understanding, what the vision is, how do we engage the people, how do we enable that leadership throughout. Let's shift a little bit and think about it from the customer's point of view. I know you've done a tremendous amount of work from the customer centricity. How do you find the customer focus being the North Star fuel innovation in a company?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because I don't want that to get lost, right? I mean, it is everything, and um, I, I remember going way back in the day. We were doing, Six Sigma at a bank. We had everybody there. We were doing all this work, and so I stood up in front of everybody and I said, "Look, here's a fundamental truth. I've seen all of your plans. Every one of you have said that if you can go from 1.7 2 products per household to 1.76 products per household, you meet your plan going away, right? And how hard could a couple hundredths of a, a number be to achieve? Well, I told him, I said, look, here's something that I want you to take away with you. Very technical Six Sigma term. You cannot cross sell, upsell, or renew a dissatisfied customer. So if you're not taking care of the customer, it doesn't work. And like I want to I want that to kind of sit out there for a little bit, because a lot of people forget that, they customers have free will. I mean, they can say, I'm not interested in giving you more money because you didn't, you didn't prove to me that the money I spent yesterday was well spent. I mean, I don't know if I even want to, still stay with you. So if you're interested in earning the right to a greater share of wallet, if you're interested in uncovering unmet needs, you have to listen. You have to observe your company from the customer's perspective, not from yours, but the classic outside in approach. And when you really take the time to do that, that's the fuel that feeds, that innovation machine that keeps you ahead of the competition. That's what continues to make it work. And you have to have that feedback loop that's constantly in play, part of that operational cadence that's always telling you, this is how they feel about you, this is what's going on, right?
So I come from a place where that sounds very similar to managing your team, right? So is leading your team very similar to leading your customers?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, come on, you gotta pay attention, that's the thing.
Well, yeah, and as you talked about, like the innovation, the ideas, and then that fueling that operational element, it is the same with your customers. Just as you're trying to engage your people on what their ideas are and bringing them into the
Right,
loop, it is the same with the customers because they're your North Star. Without customers, we have no business, right?
right, right,
I want to go back because we've got a couple of questions out there, and Brian made a really good point about something you had said, right? As a leader, it's our responsibilities to grow the next group of leaders, which I think is really powerful, and that we're not replaceable is a lie that we tell ourselves.
right.
I think that's absolutely true. So, and then Ralph has a question, right? So, as a leader, how do we overcome certain levels of fear, right? And ensure that we don't look at it as being replaceable, or knowing how to show up and that we could be replaceable is probably the better way to say that.
Yeah, there's a couple connected thoughts, right? So like the first story that I told about coming out of school. First of all, if I had been empowered to run the entire building, to be the superintendent of the building, that would be dumb, because I didn't know, right? I didn't know what I didn't know, and putting a 23-year-old in front of, in charge of all that, that would have been bad. So that would have been bad leadership, right? And that's where the time span of control says, hey, guess what? I need 5 good days from you, so that's what that's going to make happen. Now the fear aspect is, I, I can't, like I said, I can't be everywhere all at once. And the only way for me to succeed is to tell those people transparently, this is what has to happen. These are the tools. Talk to me if you're not getting what you need, because if you fail on station 20, or if you fail on your desktop, I'm going to fail, and that's not good for me either, right? So pick your poison. I always, if I'm going to be afraid, right? I'm going to be afraid that I'm not giving the team what they need to succeed, and I'm going to help them do their thing. I like, some of these you're making me think of like some old stories, right? I wanted every operator, at this factory to feel like they were running their own business. So I gave everybody a calculator. I told them, look, at the end of the day, don't just give me the number. Tell me if you made money or lost money for the department today, because we got paid for every part that we made, right? And so we knew all that. And I'm like, okay, did we make money or did we lose money? And if you want to make money and if you want to get gain sharing, make more money. And so everybody had the calculator and we did all that. And guess what? people said, all right, now I know how I connect. And, it was kind of, in many ways, we had some explaining to do, right? Because they're going, well, if we're getting paid $170 an hour, how come you're only paying me 20? you know well, let's talk about that. What goes into that rate? How do we, but that's the transparency, that's the education and all that. So I think it's, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but you got to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And leadership is about having the difficult conversations. It's about holding people accountable, right? It's about delivering results. And how are we going to do that? So you come at leadership, driving change with a very operational slant, which is powerful, right? Um, there are some folks that would say that's just too rigid, right? You're putting processes in place, that's bureaucracy, etc. But what practices do you counter that with, so organizations can really stay adaptable and avoid becoming that rigid bureaucracy type company?
Good point. I mean, I agree, right? And as you said, I'll be the first one to tell you how important process is. But at the same time, what you have to, and sometimes it just takes experience, because some people go way overboard on this, right? Is that you have to have this idea that complexity is a sign of organizational laziness, right? The way I create, a lot of process, and like, just to do all that, that shows complexity, because I haven't taken the time to simplify things, and I haven't taken the time to look at it, right? So this question, like, of all the other balance type questions that you've asked, this is the toughest one to, to overcome, right? And the reason it's really tough to overcome is because it's hard to do. So there's three things. I kind of touched on one of them already, but number one, if you want to balance this, and you got to have the experience, you gotta embrace simplicity, and you gotta be radical about it. You gotta make it as simple as possible, but not too much, right? So it's one of those things where, when you boil it to its essence, you really say, this is what's critical. The other things are kind of nice to have, which leads to the second practice, which is, you got to be pragmatic about it. I don't care how good your process is. You cannot have one process that you can adapt in every context, in every situation. So you have to be able to say, hey, this is what I can do today with what I have, and we're going to make this work, because I know what the essence of the order was, or what was required. And so that's really important, to be pragmatic, because that'll keep you away from that rigidity. And then the third thing, like I talked about, you have to value open discourse. If dissent is not welcomed in your team, you're flying blind as a leader. And so you got to be able to do those three. And if you do those three, what starts to happen is, people bring you their problems. You can figure out a way to do it. You're going to implement pragmatic, simple type solutions, and then you're just going to keep on getting better at it.
Yeah, and that getting better, it's a virtuous cycle. Like, goodness begets goodness, and it just makes things simpler. I love the simplicity statement, because over my career, I've heard so many people try to use big words or make it sound grander than it is. And at the end of the day, if you can't explain it to your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather,
For- Forget it.
you get exactly.
Forget it.
So that's how I always think about it. My mother's like, "Why do you use me as a benchmark?" I'm like, "I know if I can't explain it to you, we're out."
It's not going to work.
Yeah. How much, we're down at the bottom of the hour already, Val, but how much do you feel like the people side of things and emotional intelligence comes into play in leadership? We talked about a lot of the operational side, and I love it because it's so important. Talked about engagement. How do you bring people to the table to really want to do this?
I think you have to be present. You have to get out there. Um, I if like I said, you don't get open discourse, you don't get dissent if people don't know you, if they don't trust you, if they've never seen you before. It's like you got to get out there. You got to know something about the people, right? I'll never forget one. I had a lot of great mentors in my career because that's where a lot of these stories and foundational pieces come from. He would come in and he'd say, "Okay, Monday morning, sunrise meeting. Ellie's really happy today. Who knows why? Oh, because she went to Purdue and Purdue beat Michigan. That's why and it's like, did you know that? She works for you. What's going on? I mean, do you know something about your team? Do they know something about you? And if you don't have that, a lot of these other things just don't come into play. And so, yeah, the people part, the reason I love that quote is because I could have the greatest things in the world, but if I can't execute it, through the people that work for us and that are part of the team, it's not going to happen. And so, yeah, that's foundational. And I probably should talk about it a little bit more, but it's just one of those things I believe in, and I try to do it every day.
Well, and I appreciate that. I think there is so many people that do it naturally, don't even realize it. There's a few that don't even know what it is, right? But it is something that can be learned and continually um, brought to the forefront because we forget it, right? Like there's sometimes my staff will be like, Kath, it would have been nice with a little thank you. I'm like, oh yeah, but I meant to do it. They're like, okay, but we want to hear
But you
it.
didn't.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's harder. It's harder in this new virtual world we're in post COVID, right? Because when man, I used to walk through the office, see people, talk to them, walk the factory floor, walk everywhere, get out in the field, talk to people, and I think it's starting to come back a little bit, but it's still incredibly important when people are by themselves in these remote islands. It's pretty easy to ping people. It's pretty easy to say, "Hey, what's going on? You got time for a quick chat?" Just to check in, what's going, especially, as part of the onboarding. And then once you do that, you got to continue on, right? Um, Last job, and I know I could talk about this all day. I feel like Captain America in the Marvel movies. I could do this all day, but I was working with people. I interviewed them, I hired them, worked with them for over a year before meeting them in person. And the only way that worked was get on a webcam, get on a Teams meeting, Zoom, whatever it was, and talk to people. It's
Yep.
not always about what the next assignment is. It's about, hey, what's going on? How'd,
Yeah.
how'd you hit him? How'd you hit him yesterday on the golf course? What'd you do? What's going on? Where are you hiking this weekend? How are you going to dress the kids up for Halloween this year? I mean, little things like that. I mean, it takes some of that work.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that. And so Dennis agreed as well, where so true, knowing your people and then realizing it is an element of building trust in your leadership. And it's so important.
Yep.
So Val, thank you so much for this because, what we talked about is innovation without leadership will fail every time, right? It is strong
Yep.
leadership that brings an idea through to fruition to deliver those results. And it's about being a leader. And so thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for
If
the
people want
conversation,
to
Kathy. Yeah.
Thanks. If people want to learn a little bit more about you, I assume they can follow you on LinkedIn. Is
Oh
there a
yeah. Yeah.
website that we can share with them?
Yeah. Yeah. Perpetual Innovation Machine. We
Excellent.
can put it. We can put in the link and get it out there. It's
Yeah, perfect. We will do that. And also, if anyone is interested to learn a little bit more, we talked about the E3 Leadership Code of Express, Engage, and Execute, powered by emotional qualities. We're having a masterclass next Thursday, actually talking about that emotional quality and how important it is in your workplace and having an edge as a leader. So thank you all for joining us. Val, again, thank you. This conversation was fantastic. I know I took away a lot of nuggets and I'll summarize it in the notes afterwards. But thank you all and have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.